All right, so we're wrapping up our deep dive into introduction to regenerative agriculture with this final chapter.
Yeah, looking at the conclusion and future outlook.
We've really gone through a lot, right? From the science behind it, and even seen some really fascinating examples of regenerative farms around the world.
Yeah.
Now, this last chapter, chapter 8, it kind of brings everything together, right?
Exactly. And I think what's really cool about this chapter is it doesn't shy away from the challenges. You know, it acknowledges that there are hurdles while still maintaining this sense of optimism about the potential of regenerative agriculture.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we've tried to do throughout this whole deep dive as well, to present a balanced perspective.
Yeah.
So before we get to the challenges, let's just take a minute to kind of recap those key takeaways.
Okay.
Because I think it's really easy to get lost in the weeds sometimes.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that stand out to you?
So, you know, regenerative agriculture, it's about going beyond just sustainability, you know, it's about actively restoring and regenerating ecosystems.
Yeah.
And it all starts with the soil.
The soil, yeah.
Remember all those intricate details about the soil food web?
Oh, yeah.
And how vital healthy soil is for everything you know, from water retention to carbon sequestration.
It really is the foundation of the whole system.
It is, yeah.
And I think one of the things that really fascinates me is the way that regenerative practices mimic natural ecosystems. It's not just about planting crops.
Right.
You're really creating this thriving, biodiverse environment.
Right. And that biodiversity piece is key, you know, not just for soil health, but for the overall resilience of the farm.
Okay.
The more diverse the ecosystem, the better it can handle things like pests, diseases, even unpredictable weather patterns.
Which are only getting worse.
Exactly.
With climate change. And speaking of climate change, we can't forget the potential for regenerative agriculture to actually help mitigate climate change.
Right.
Pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, storing it in the soil.
Yeah.
That's pretty huge.
It is. It is. And the chapter also points out, you know, the ripple effects that healthy ecosystems have on water conservation.
Right.
Healthy soil acts like a sponge.
Oh, yeah.
Absorbing and holding water.
Right.
Which is, you know, especially important as we're facing growing concerns about drought and water scarcity.
It's also interconnected.
It is.
You know, the healthy soil, the biodiversity, the water conservation, the climate change mitigation.
All of these pieces fit together to
Yeah.
create this more resilient and sustainable system.
And I think we also have to mention the socioeconomic benefits
Absolutely.
that the chapter really highlights.
Regenerative agriculture has the potential to improve farmer livelihoods, revitalize rural communities, create a more just and equitable food system.
So it's not just good for the planet, it's good for people too. That's a pretty compelling argument for why this movement matters.
It is.
Yeah.
But as we discussed, you know, the chapter doesn't shy away from the challenges.
Right.
So let's shift gears a little bit and dive into those.
Okay.
What are some of the biggest hurdles facing regenerative agriculture today?
I think the one that comes to mind immediately is scaling up. We've seen all these amazing examples of these regenerative farms that are working on a smaller scale.
Right.
But how do we make this the norm rather than the exception?
That's the key question, right?
Yeah.
It points to a need for systemic change. We need policies that support and incentivize regenerative practices, financial resources to help farmers make the transition, educational programs to equip them with the knowledge and skills.
Right, because it's a whole different way of thinking about farming.
It is.
And I imagine that those deeply ingrained market forces that we've talked about are also a major obstacle.
Absolutely.
It's tough for farmers to think long term.
Right.
When the current system rewards
short-term profits,
high
yields,
exactly,
regardless of the environmental costs.
So how do you reconcile that?
The chapter really emphasizes that tension.
Yeah.
Between short-term economic pressures and the long-term vision of regenerative agriculture.
Right.
And it acknowledges those market forces are powerful.
Yeah.
To truly shift the system we need to change consumer demand, create markets for sustainably produced food, and find ways to make regenerative agriculture economically viable for farmers.
Okay, so that's a big one. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room. Climate change.
Yeah.
It's, you know, regenerative agriculture can help mitigate climate change.
Right.
But it's also vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, extreme weather events.
Yeah. How do we navigate that?
How do we navigate that?
That's a crucial point the chapter raises.
Yeah.
It calls for a focus on adaptation and resilience. We need to develop regenerative practices that can withstand those increasingly unpredictable conditions.
Right.
And that requires ongoing research and innovation, which the chapter identifies as a key area of focus.
So even though we've come so far in understanding regenerative agriculture, we still have a lot to learn.
Absolutely, we're still learning.
Right.
And the chapter stresses that knowledge sharing is vital.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that those research findings are accessible to farmers, especially in developing countries, who might not have the resources to access the latest scientific information.
Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done, but there's also a lot of potential.
Definitely.
So where do we go from here? What can we as individuals do to support this movement?
That's where Chapter 8 gets really interesting. It outlines a call to action for various stakeholders, from consumers to policymakers, researchers, and communities. It emphasizes that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of regenerative agriculture.
We all have a role to play.
Yeah. And it's encouraging to see that it doesn't just lay out the problems. Right. It actually offers solutions.
Okay.
And, acknowledges the roles that different groups need to play to make this happen.
Okay, so let's break that down.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to feel really overwhelmed by these big global challenges. Where does someone like me, as a consumer, even begin to make a difference?
Well, your choices in the supermarket actually have more power than you might think.
Really?
The chapter emphasizes the role of consumer demand.
Okay.
Seeking out and supporting products from regenerative farms sends a really powerful message to the market.
I can see that, but honestly, it's so hard with all the labels out there.
Yeah.
And all the certifications to really know what to trust.
Yeah.
How do I even know if something is truly regenerative?
You're right. It can be a jungle out there. The chapter suggests, looking for specific certifications, like Regenerative Organic Certified, which have stricter standards that go beyond just organic practices.
Got it.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Oh, okay.
Talk to your local farmers at the farmers market or research brands online to see what practices they're using.
So it's really about being an informed and conscious consumer.
Exactly.
Yeah, making choices that align with my values. I can get behind that.
And it goes beyond just buying power.
Okay.
Your voice matters too.
Okay, how so?
The chapter encourages consumers to advocate for policies that support regenerative agriculture.
All right, so let's talk about policymakers then.
Okay.
What kind of policy shifts need to happen to create a system that actually supports regenerative agriculture?
Well, right now, a lot of agricultural policies are actually working against regenerative practices.
Oh, wow.
They incentivize things like chemical inputs, monocultures, which are the opposite of what we're aiming for.
So you're saying we need like a pretty big overhaul?
The chapter calls for a pretty big overhaul.
Okay, what would that even look like?
Imagine policies that provide financial incentives for farmers to transition to regenerative practices.
Okay.
Things like tax breaks, subsidies for cover crops, grants for implementing water conservation techniques.
So instead of subsidizing practices that are harmful, we'd be supporting those that are actually beneficial.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do we make that happen? I'm just one person.
Never underestimate the power of your voice. Write to your elected officials.
Okay.
Sign petitions, support organizations that are lobbying for regenerative agriculture policies.
Okay, so those individual actions can add up?
They can create real pressure for change.
Okay, I'll add that to my to-do list.
Yeah.
Right to my representative. What about the role of research? We touched on this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But how can scientists and researchers further contribute to the advancement of regenerative agriculture?
Well, the chapter emphasizes that we're still really in the early stages of understanding the complexities of these systems. There's so much more to discover.
Okay.
We need ongoing research to refine techniques to adapt to new challenges like climate change and to explore innovations that can make regenerative agriculture even more effective and accessible.
So are there specific areas of research that are particularly important?
The chapter highlights a few.
Okay.
Understanding the soil microbiome is key.
Okay.
Imagine if we could develop targeted microbial inoculants that just supercharge soil health.
Wow.
That would be a game changer.
Yeah.
And then there's the need for more efficient and affordable technologies that help farmers monitor soil health, water usage, carbon sequestration.
Like practical tools.
Practical tools that make it easier.
To make that transition.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like there's a huge opportunity for innovation in this space.
Huge.
And then, of course, there's the role of communities.
Yes.
The chapter reminds us that this isn't just about individual farms. It's about building a movement from the ground up.
So how can communities get involved?
And support this transition.
Well, supporting your local farmers is a great place to start.
Okay.
Shopping at farmers markets, joining community-supported agriculture programs or CSAs,
right,
or even just having conversations with the people who grow your food.
Yeah.
It's about building those connections,
right,
and creating a more localized food system.
There's something really powerful about knowing where your food comes from and supporting the people who are growing it sustainably.
Right. And community involvement goes beyond just buying food. It's about education and awareness raising.
Okay.
The chapter encourages community gardens workshops on regenerative practices. Even just talking about regenerative agriculture with your friends and family.
Spreading the word.
Spreading the word, creating a ripple effect of change.
I love that. So it's really inspiring to see how the chapter empowers individuals to make a difference.
It is.
No matter what their role is in the system.
And it paints a picture of what a regenerative future could look like.
Yeah.
But, this deep dive wouldn't be complete without exploring some real-world examples.
You telling me.
Of how these principles are being put into practice.
Yeah, let's get to the good stuff.
So the chapter mentions some inspiring case studies of regenerative agriculture projects happening around the world.
What are some of the highlights?
Well, how about a trip to the coffee farms of Latin America and Africa?
Okay. I'm intrigued.
You might be surprised to learn that even a giant corporation like Starbucks is embracing regenerative practices.
Really?
They've been working with coffee farmers in countries like Guatemala, Mexico, and Rwanda to implement water conservation measures and improve soil health.
Okay.
They're even investing in research to understand how regenerative practices impact coffee yields and quality.
So even a company that's known for its lattes can play a role in promoting sustainable agriculture.
Absolutely. And it makes good business sense, too.
How so?
Healthy coffee plants mean better yields.
Right.
And a more secure supply chain.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this can work on a larger scale. What other examples caught your eye?
Well, how about a journey to the grasslands of Zimbabwe?
Okay.
The Savory Institute has been working with farmers there to reverse desertification.
That's a big one.
Which is a huge problem in dryland regions.
Yeah.
They're using a technique called holistic management, which mimics the grazing patterns of wild herds.
Interesting.
To restore soil health and regenerate degraded landscapes.
So you're telling me that cows can actually be part of the solution?
That's right.
Wow.
When managed properly, livestock can play a vital role in revitalizing ecosystems.
Okay.
It's all about understanding natural cycles and working with them, rather than against them.
That's fascinating. And I imagine those restored grasslands have a positive impact on biodiversity and carbon sequestration, too.
They do. It's a win-win for the environment and the communities who depend on those grasslands for their livelihoods.
Okay, so we've gone from coffee farms to grasslands. What else?
Oh, for something completely different, how about a trip to the Arctic Circle?
The Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
What's happening there that relates to regenerative agriculture?
Have you ever heard of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault?
I have. Isn't that where they're storing seeds from all over the world? Like a giant backup for our food supply?
Exactly. And while it's not directly related to regenerative practices on farms, it highlights the importance of biodiversity and the need to protect our agricultural heritage. It's a reminder that the seeds we plant today are essential for the resilience of our food systems in the future.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
It makes you realize the stakes are high.
They are, and the chapter also showcases some inspiring work that's happening across the African continent.
Okay, tell me more.
The International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC.
A lot of acronyms.
I know, have been supporting the adoption of regenerative practices in various countries, leading to increased crop yields, improved soil health, and greater resilience to climate change.
So it's not just a movement that's happening in developed countries. It's gaining traction globally.
Absolutely. And it's proving that regenerative agriculture can be a really powerful tool for addressing some of the most pressing challenges facing humanity, from food security to climate change.
So we've traveled from the tropics to the Arctic Circle to the African savanna. Any other stops on our global regenerative agriculture tour?
Well, we can't wrap up this exploration without mentioning a true pioneer in the field, Gabe Brown.
Okay, I've heard that name.
He's a farmer in North Dakota who has become a sort of rock star of the regenerative agriculture movement.
Okay.
He's been practicing and advocating for these principles for decades.
Wow.
And his farm has become a model of what's possible when you work with nature, not against it.
What's so special about his approach?
Well, he uses a combination of no-till farming, cover cropping, diverse crop rotations, and integrated livestock grazing.
Wow. It's like the whole package.
To create a system that's not only environmentally sustainable, but also highly productive and profitable.
So he's really walking the walk.
He is.
And showing that it can be done.
And he's incredibly generous about sharing his knowledge.
Oh, that's great.
He's written books, given countless talks, and hosted workshops on his farm.
Wow.
Inspiring countless other farmers to transition to regenerative practices.
I love that spirit of collaboration.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a real community building around this movement.
There is, and the chapter concludes by highlighting another important aspect of that community, the United Nations Environment Program, or UNP, and their work in promoting agroecology. It's an approach that goes beyond just environmental sustainability and incorporates social and economic justice principles as well.
So it's about creating a food system that's good for people and the planet.
Exactly. And UNP has launched initiatives like the Transformative Partnership Platform on Agroecology, which brings together farmers, scientists, policymakers, and civil society organizations from around the world to collaborate on agroecology projects and share knowledge.
It feels like we've come full circle.
It has.
From, the individual consumer making choices in the supermarket to these global organizations that are working to transform our food systems.
Yeah, it's clear that this movement is gaining momentum on all fronts.
It really is.
Okay.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to remember about the future of regenerative agriculture?
I think the most important message is that this isn't just a trend. It's a paradigm shift.
Wow.
It's a fundamental change in how we view our relationship with the natural world and with the food we eat.
Yeah.
And it's a movement that offers hope for a healthier, more sustainable, and more equitable future for all.
Hearing about these real-world examples really brings it all to life.
It does.
It's not just a theory, it's actually happening.
Yeah, and it's happening now.
Right now on farms and in communities around the world.
That's what's so compelling about this chapter.
Yeah.
It really bridges the gap between the principles and the practice. It shows how these ideas can actually be put into action and achieve incredible results.
And I feel like there's this growing sense of urgency around this whole movement. Like we're at a tipping point where we really need to make some fundamental changes to our food systems.
Yeah, definitely.
If we want to ensure a healthy planet.
For future generations.
For future generations, exactly. Oh. So the chapter really acknowledges that sense of urgency.
It does.
But it also offers a path forward.
Yeah, it doesn't shy away from the challenges, but it presents this vision for what's possible if we commit to this more regenerative approach.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away?
I think the most important message is that this isn't just about changing farming practices. It's about changing our mindset.
That's a big one.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're not separate from nature, but a part of it. And that our choices, both as individuals and as a society, have a profound impact on the health of our planet and the well-being of future generations.
That's beautifully said. It's a message of hope and empowerment. It reminds us that we all have a role to play.
We do.
In creating a more sustainable and regenerative future.
Exactly. And that future starts with a single step.
Yeah.
So if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to keep learning, exploring, and taking action.
Yeah, in whatever way you can.
However you can.
Whether it's, planting a garden, supporting your local farmers, advocating for policy changes. Every action, no matter how small,
contributes to this collective effort to regenerate our planet.
This has been an incredible journey.
It has.
Exploring the principles, the practices, the potential of regenerative agriculture.
And we hope it's been as inspiring and informative for you.
As it has been for us.
It really has.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
And until next time, keep digging deeper.